Can we really trust collective memory? If everyone remembers something happening, then it must have happened that way, right? This video might make you think twice about that idea. Some memories don't begin in the mind of a single person. They spread among people who have never met, across different countries and generations, until they become an accepted version of reality. One person tells a story, another confirms it, the media repeats it, an image reinforces it, and over time, any doubt fades away. The problem begins when the evidence doesn't match the memory, when archives, recordings, maps, or official documents tell a completely different story. In this video, we'll explore cases where millions of people remember something that in reality never existed. On October 30, 1938, CBS broadcast a radio adaptation of The War of the Worlds, directed by Orson Welles. The program was presented as a series of breaking news bulletins interrupting a musical broadcast, describing an alien invasion unfolding in real time. In the days that followed, a version of events began to spread that would be repeated for decades. According to this story, millions of people panicked, fled their homes, jammed telephone lines, and plunged the United States into an instant outbreak of mass hysteria. Newspapers at the time published alarming headlines that reinforced this narrative, presenting the broadcast as proof of the dangerous influence radio held over the public. As the years passed, this version of events became firmly embedded in collective memory. Even today, it is common to find references describing the broadcast as a case of mass panic that threw the United States into chaos. But later research dismantled that story. Audience studies conducted in the following years showed that the actual number of listeners was relatively limited, partly because the program was competing with extremely popular shows airing on other stations at the same time. Many of those who did hear the broadcast understood that it was a dramatization. Others tuned in after it had already been explained that the program was only a fictional performance. Reports of panic did exist, but they were isolated incidents. Much of the reaction was amplified by the print media, which at the time was engaged in direct competition with radio, the country's dominant form of mass communication. The idea of a nationwide panic was built far more on sensational headlines than on verifiable evidence. Even so, the exaggerated version survived for generations. This case is not simply about an event that was misunderstood when it happened. It reveals something even more specific, an inflated narrative that, over time, came to be accepted as a real memory by people who never experienced the event themselves. Collective memory does not always preserve what actually happened. More often, it preserves the version that was repeated the loudest. During the second half of the 19th century, European astronomers were faced with a puzzling problem. Mercury's orbit did not perfectly match the predictions of Newtonian mechanics. To explain the discrepancy, French mathematician Urbain Le Verrier proposed a straightforward solution. There had to be an unknown celestial body between Mercury and the Sun, whose gravity was altering the planet's path. The object was given a name and even an estimated orbit, Vulcan. From that point on, reports began to pile up. Observers across different parts of Europe claimed to have seen small dark disks crossing the surface of the Sun. In 1859, astronomer Edmund Liskobel announced that he had recorded a complete transit of the supposed planet, noting its timing and position in remarkable detail. In the years that followed, other reports emerged, many describing similar sightings. This was not the testimony of a single isolated observer. It was a collection of observations that seemed to point toward the existence of a real object. The problem was that no consistent confirmation ever followed. Other astronomers, using similar instruments and observing under comparable conditions, simply found nothing. The alleged transits followed no predictable pattern and could not be reliably reproduced. Systematic searches conducted during solar eclipses, moments when the sun's glare is reduced, making nearby objects easier to detect, also failed to produce conclusive results. At the beginning of the 20th century, the explanation changed dramatically. Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity accurately described Mercury's orbital behavior without the need for any additional planet. The anomaly was no longer considered evidence of a hidden world, but instead a consequence of the curvature of space-time caused by the sun's immense mass. But the strangest part of this story is not simply that Vulcan never existed, it is what was recorded before the hypothesis was abandoned. Multiple detailed observations of the same phenomenon were made by people who shared neither instruments, methods, nor geographic locations. Some of these sightings can be explained by sunspots, misidentified transits of Mercury, or even optical imperfections in the telescopes of the era. but not every report fits neatly into those explanations. For decades, the scientific community operated under the assumption that the planet was real, relying on records that appeared consistent and trustworthy. Over time, those very same observations came to be interpreted as mistakes. The planet disappeared, but the belief that it had once been there survived for many years afterward. At the beginning of the 20th century, an event took place that would become one of the most controversial episodes in the history of American zoos and amusement parks. It was the execution of an elephant named Topsy on Coney Island, New York. During her years in captivity, Topsy had been involved in the deaths of several people, and her owners ultimately decided that she would be put down. At first, a number of extremely brutal methods were considered, including a public hanging. In the end, however, the decision was made to use a combination of poison and electrocution. The event took place in 1903 before a crowd of witnesses and was treated almost like a public spectacle. The execution was also filmed by the Edison Manufacturing Company, a major player in the motion picture industry at the time. As the years passed, a simplified version of the story began to spread. According to this narrative, Thomas Edison personally took part in Topsy's execution as part of his campaign against alternating current during the so-called War of the Currents. This version of events eventually appeared in documentaries, books, articles, and popular references, portraying the incident as a demonstration orchestrated by Edison to discredit his rivals. The problem is that the historical record does not support that story. Topsy's execution took place years after the War of the Currents had already lost much of its public relevance. Furthermore, there is no reliable evidence that Edison was present at the site or that he organized the event. Even so, the connection between Edison and the elephant's death continued to be repeated for decades, eventually becoming a collective memory that many people accept as unquestionable historical fact. The persistence of this version can be explained by the way real facts became mixed with details added over time. Thomas Edison did, in fact, participate in campaigns designed to demonstrate the dangers of electricity. In earlier decades, he was involved in public demonstrations that used animals to illustrate the risks associated with alternating current. That history makes the association remarkably easy to draw. Adding to the confusion is the fact that a real film of Topsy's execution exists, reinforcing the impression that Edison was directly involved in the event. However, the footage was produced by a company that carried his commercial name, and there is no evidence that he personally participated in the execution itself. From that point on, the story begins to simplify itself. A famous inventor, a controversial practice, and an event captured on film. Together, these elements create a narrative that is far easier to tell and far easier to remember. Over time, the simplified version replaces the details, the nuances disappear, the context is forgotten, and collective memory ends up preserving a specific scene that in reality never happened that way at all. In 1971, in the small Spanish town of Belmez de la Mora, human faces began appearing on the concrete floor of a private home. The phenomenon, which would later become known as the Faces of Belmez, was not limited to a single static image. According to reports from the time, the faces appeared, disappeared, and in some cases seemed to change shape over the course of days. Researchers, journalists, and curious visitors traveled to the site to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Many documented what they saw through photographs taken at different points in time. The images show faces with relatively distinct features, some clearer than others, scattered across different areas of the home's floor. This was not an isolated event. The phenomenon continued to be reported for years, generating an enormous collection of photographs, newspaper articles, and visual records. At certain points, local authorities even sealed off sections of the floor to determine whether new images would appear without outside interference. And when the faces reportedly appeared again, the case gained even more attention, adding yet another layer to the mystery. The problem emerged when all of this material began to be compared. Photographs that supposedly showed the same location during the same period did not always match one another. In some cases, one image clearly displayed a face where another, taken under seemingly similar conditions, showed absolutely nothing or revealed a completely different figure. And these discrepancies were not limited to the gradual changes that, according to witnesses, occurred over time. They were direct contradictions between records that should have been equivalent. Some of these differences can be explained by technical factors: the angle of the photograph, lighting conditions, the quality of the camera used, or even the deterioration of original negatives and prints. But not every inconsistency fits neatly into those explanations. The result is a problem of documentation more than interpretation. There are multiple visual records that fail to establish a single, stable version of what was actually being observed. As the years passed, reproductions, publications, and new copies began reinforcing specific versions of certain images, while others were forgotten or altered during the process of distribution itself. The central question is not simply whether the faces really appeared. The deeper question is this: which images truly represent what was happening at any given moment? For more than a century, a landmass appeared completely normally on official maps, nautical charts, and geographic databases. Its name was Sandy Island, supposedly located in the Coral Sea between Australia and New Caledonia. It was not some obscure mistake buried in secondary documents. The island appeared on 19th century maps created by European explorers, was incorporated into charts used for real-world navigation, and eventually found its way into modern digital systems, including oceanographic catalogues and global mapping platforms. In many records, Sandy Island even had a defined outline and estimated dimensions, as if it had been carefully observed and accurately documented. For generations, sailors, researchers, and automated systems treated it as a legitimate geographic location. There were no warnings or notes of uncertainty. The island was simply there, at least until 2012. That year, an Australian scientific expedition decided to verify its existence while passing through the region. The researchers adjusted their route directly toward the recorded coordinates, leaving no room for error. When they arrived, they found no coastline, no reefs, and no sign of land, only open ocean. To eliminate any remaining doubt, the team conducted detailed bathymetric surveys. The results showed that the seafloor in that area lay more than 1,400 meters below the surface, making it physically impossible for a recent or submerged island to exist at that location. A later investigation traced the origin of the mistake to a 19th century report, likely based on a faulty observation or large floating masses of pumice produced by volcanic activity that had been mistaken for solid land. The original information was copied again and again without direct verification. It passed from map to map, from catalogue to catalogue, until it became accepted as fact. But the most remarkable part of this story is not the mistake itself. It is how long the mistake survived. For more than 100 years, a place that never existed was accepted, reproduced, and passed down as reliable knowledge. The island did not disappear. It was removed from the maps when someone finally confirmed that it had never been there in the first place. On May 19, 1780, a vast region of New England and eastern Canada was engulfed by an unusual darkness in the middle of the day. It was not an eclipse, and no astronomical record exists that can account for what happened. From the early hours of the morning, daylight gradually began to fade until it became too weak for even the most basic daily activities. Independent accounts preserved in diaries and municipal records describe the same scene with a level of consistency that is difficult to ignore. The sky reportedly took on shades of yellow, orange, and in many accounts, even a strange greenish hue. Visibility dropped so dramatically that candles had to be lit at noon. Birds and other animals reacted as though night had arrived, returning to their shelters far earlier than usual. In many communities, the darkness persisted for hours. When some light finally returned that evening, the moon was described as dim and reddish, filtered through an atmosphere heavy with suspended particles. The consistency of reports coming from locations separated by hundreds of miles makes it highly unlikely that this was a localized phenomenon. For decades, the most widely accepted explanations were a solar eclipse or an extraordinary storm. Yet neither theory fit the timing or the geographic scale of the event. Modern research has reconstructed a far more likely explanation. Massive wildfires, probably in areas that are now part of Ontario, are believed to have released enormous quantities of smoke into the atmosphere. That smoke drifted southward and combined with dense fog and unusual atmospheric conditions, creating a layer capable of blocking much of the sun's light. Indirect evidence, including patterns found in tree rings and historical records of major fires, points in that direction. But one detail remains especially intriguing. The original accounts have remained remarkably consistent in their descriptions. What changed over time was the interpretation of the event as new explanations emerged. Collective memory never contradicted what people reported seeing. Yet even today, many people confidently claim that the darkness was caused by a solar eclipse that in reality never occurred.